What's up, everyone? Welcome into the All 22 NFL podcast, the official podcast of the All 22 fantasy football platform, the only fantasy football game with full 53-man rosters, including offensive linemen, where you get to choose personnel packages and have access to PFF grading and advanced stats to make decisions each week. To learn more, go to all-22.com. And also, guys, we have a mobile app. If you are playing All 22 on the website, I know it's awesome. The formation graphic is totally badass, but our app is pretty dope too. So definitely go to either the Apple App Store, Google Play, go download that. It's available on both platforms. So we'd love to have you in there. Ray, I am leaving this episode to you. You wanted a second episode. You saw Kirk Cousins go off yesterday. You couldn't resist talking about it. So I'm here at your, whatever you want to do. I'm here for you, buddy. You're leading this thing.
I'm pretty sure Kirk Cousins is absolutely nowhere in my show notes, like at all. Like the word Kirk or Cousins or cousin, like absolutely none. However, doesn't it feel good to be vindicated? Doesn't it feel good to be proven right, no matter how long it takes? Because I like to say all the time, I'm never wrong. I'm just early. Okay.
The hell were you
People
early on?
had all these years to sit here and act like Sam Darnold wasn't a legit NFL quarterback. They had all these years to act like Baker Mayfield wasn't actually good.
There it is.
We've been saying for the longest that Baker Mayfield is a good to very good quarterback in the NFL, but he had been failed over and over and over again. And, all these people with their Twitter fingers out there want to talk a lot of mess, but then they just move on to the next thing when finally we're proven correct, when they're finally in a grown-up environment, in a competent system, and we can see what they can do. It just feels good to be proven right after all these years. And that goes for your boy, Kirk Cousins, a bit as well, too, now, right? Because people were slow to come around. He's your boy. Because we've mentioned for the last couple of years that Kirk Cousins he's playing well. Like we were saying at the time, he's playing very well, and people just aren't really catching on or giving him the credit. And it's almost like the old Pro Bowl thing where if you play like a Pro Bowler one year, it's typically the year after that you get recognized and actually make the Pro Bowl. It's kind of what happened with Kirk Cousins, where now after last night, people are like, hey, Kirk Cousins is actually pretty good and the Achilles doesn't look so bad. And we were like, well, before the Achilles, he was good. He was legitimately good and better than he was giving credit for. So I'll throw him in the mix too, but it feels darn good to just be vindicated. And so I'll pat ourselves on the back because no one else will. Yeah. And that was, so I kind of went into this episode saying, what did I learn in September? I already knew this. I already knew that I was right about this stuff, right? And you were too. So I didn't learn that, but I do think it's good with a month of the season sort of under our belt now to take a look back, get some takeaways. But again, I will always remind you that you really did hear it here first, that Sam Darnold was a legitimate quarterback and just needed a fair shake. And we've been on the Baker Mayfield bus for a while, and we've been trying to give Kirk Cousins his due. So
Let's
not sure if you want to
take a minute. Yeah. Let's take a minute and talk about this because it feels vindicating for multiple reasons, right? And you mentioned a bunch about us being right, but it's not about that, even though I appreciate you saying it.
It's all about that.
But like being a Packer fan, this is something I've preached for a long time, is I don't necessarily think that you should throw a rookie quarterback to the fire and just pray that it works, right? CJ Stroud has been the only quarterback in the last 5 drafts that has done that successfully, right? Like even Trevor Lawrence, who say what people want, right? Sam Monson posted on Twitter the list of generational quarterbacks. It was like John Elway, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck. But I really think there's an argument that people thought Trevor Lawrence was a generational quarterback when he was drafted. I think he would be the 4th quarterback on that list. And he's not doing well, right? He's really not playing that well. Does not mean he's a bad football player. It just means maybe that in 2 or 3 more years, when he has more experience, maybe a better team around him, better coaching, better situation, whatever it is, right? Or just maturity, he's going to figure it out and he will be great. I want people to succeed. I'm kind of sick of hey, I told you that guy sucked.
Now you're being the old man yelling at the cloud, but yes, please.
No, I don't think people should, Anthony Richardson, right? We talked about it last week. Yeah, I think he might be failing. And I hate saying that. I absolutely despise it. I think people that say that with a glimmer of joy in their eye, kind of like POSs, right? That's not something you should feel. But I think that when quarterbacks are meant to just go into the NFL and thrown into the fire and be successful, it's a recipe for disaster. And the only reason it's happening is because these owners are just so quick to pull the switch, on a head coach and make a change that coaches feel like they don't have any other options, right? Like it's just not really fair to anyone. That's why again, this is vindicating too. I loved what the Falcons did, and people hated the Michael Penix pick. I loved it, right? Like I get Kirk Cousins just came here, agreed to be your quarterback, to be the president of your team. Why not take a guy to learn to be the next guy? Kirk Cousins is 36 years old, coming off of an Achilles tear. It's 2 years, right? Like you have him for 2 years, and God willing, it's even that long. Let's get a guy in here to learn, to sit for a couple of years, because guess what? That's when the best quarterbacks emerge. Patrick Mahomes sat for a year. Sam Darnold did not. Baker Mayfield did not. Trevor Lawrence did not. Those guys struggled early in their careers. But guess what? Like we're seeing it now, right? Guys that now had a chance to sit maybe and learn for a year, or, just had enough time in the NFL to develop, like Baker now. We're seeing the best of them. I think a lot of these quarterbacks that we're just writing off this year, an example, right? Caleb Williams is struggling. Bo Nix is struggling. Who else started, right? Like Jaden Daniels looks good.
Daniels looks good. Yeah.
It's
been 4 games, but yes.
It's been 4 games, and pause on that, right? Like Jaden Daniels is a different style of quarterback who has the running ability, and that opens up a lot of different things. What we've seen, and again, I'm not being a hater. I love running quarterbacks. I love the way NFL does it, but a lot of times once those teams enter the playoffs, because they do make the playoffs because they are explosive and can do enough damage, but when they enter the playoffs, they lose immediately. Because when you get to the playoffs, you play the best defenses, and what the best defenses can do is make you change the way you're playing the game of football, right? And immature quarterbacks can't do that, right? We've seen it with time and time again with Lamar and with quarterbacks with that style. I think Jaden Daniels has the opportunity to be a fantastic NFL quarterback, but I really don't think the conversation changes in terms of what he needs to be to win, right? Like to be the best NFL quarterback in reality, you need to win playoff games. That's why Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes are thought of as the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now, because they're consistently getting deep into the playoffs. That's why people believe in Joe Burrow. That's why people hate on Dak Prescott, right? It's because you need to be able to get to that next level. Dak Prescott is another example of a guy that didn't have a time to sit and learn, right? He was thrown in there.
They also hate Dak Prescott because he's a Cowboy. But yes.
I love Dak Prescott. I think he's a great player. It's just there hasn't been that next level play, right? And it's for all of these guys. Let's change the narrative. Let's give coaches a few extra years. I really hope the New York Giants do not fire the coach. Don't fire Dabble. Let's keep him there. Let him get his quarterback. Let that quarterback sit for a year behind Daniel Jones, and then let's see what Dable can be with that quarterback. I'm hearing like the Alabama kid as a prospect for the Giants. Kind of, I don't like him either that much, but I'm just saying, like, let's give these guys opportunities. Let's change the way we're doing things. I think everybody learned that this year. I think everybody's finally realizing that. Thank you, Jordan Love, for kind of proving the Packers right. Because I really think if Jordan Love started year one, he would have been atrocious. He would have been out of the league by now. And we're seeing that with other guys.
Well, the thing is, too, when it comes to running quarterbacks, they actually find success early in their careers and then are adjusted to expand on your point. And you even go back to like RG3, for example. He had a ton of success. And then, yes, there were injuries, but even so, even when the injury stripped him of much of the running ability, he was just not the type of quarterback to play enough within timing and structure to be successful in the league. But whether it's RG3, it's Kaepernick, you could say Richardson, but again, he hasn't been healthy enough to really sort of stick around long enough to have to worry about that next step in his evolution process. But those mobile quarterbacks typically find success early. The league adjusts, they find out what makes them comfortable, and then they have to adjust to that adjustment. And that's the key to whether or not that quarterback is going to be successful. And a lot of times, if they're doing that in year 2 in the league, if they had immediate success and they're a young player, they might not know or be conditioned to deal with that type of adversity. Again, just that adjustment, because now you're a 23-year-old who's had immediate success. and you haven't experienced that failure yet. And how are you going to respond to that after having that immediate success? That could also be a part of it too. There's so much psychoanalysis that goes into the quarterback position. This is not at all where my show notes were going. I just wanted to brag about being correct about Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, and then you added Kirk Cousins. But to that end, yes, it's the dynamics. And I think the best way to sum this up is what Kevin O'Connell said, I think a couple weeks back when talking about Sam Darnold, in the sense that, or more so alluding to Sam Darnold, right? Because these coaches never say these things directly, right? Because it's just, I don't know, bro code among coaches or what have you. But he stated that organizations fail young quarterbacks more than young quarterbacks fail organizations. And that's the best way to sum this up. Whatever stage your organization is when a young quarterback is drafted, most likely, right, into the organization, whether you sit them like the Patriots are doing with Drake May now, which again I think is the right choice. It's easy to take a step back, not as a Patriots fan to say that, or in the event that you have to start them, right? Because you mentioned Dak Prescott, and Dak Prescott wasn't intended to be an immediate starter, right? Tony Romo was hurt in the preseason and then came in, but the Cowboys had the best offensive line in the league, a fantastic running back in a young Ezekiel Elliott. They had Des Bryant. That was a playoff. That was a deep playoff caliber team at the time, and they just plugged him in and never had to rely on Dak to win games. So there's multiple ways to skin the cat. It's not necessarily binary of start, don't start, sit for this long and not that long, but you have to, as an organization, have the pieces in place, or the plan in place and structure in place, to allow these quarterbacks to succeed. Because if not, a bunch of people on Twitter are going to go on for 4 years about how they're trash, while people who watch the tape try to tell you that they're actually pretty good, but just are not getting a fair shake. And then 28-year-old Baker Mayfield and 26-year-old Sam Darnold are taking the league by storm. And I have to sit here after biding my time to tell you that I told you so. That is now 12 minutes into the podcast. I think we've beaten up the quarterbacks enough.
I'm not ready. I'm not ready. Because Drake May, you hit on something I want to talk about. Drake May, right? Because I was the haterade POS talking about Drake May and how I was upset that he went to the Patriots because they didn't have the team around him to be successful. And that's a perfect example. If they had started him, which I suspected they would, it would have failed miserably. And we would be talking about him as that guy that in a couple of years would probably be out of the league because it just never panned out, right? What they are doing is the right thing. They're letting him sit and learn. They're not throwing him into the fire. And I think that's great for him. Chances are right now they're going to be a top 5 pick, right? They're going to be able to get a top offensive tackle or a top receiver to be implemented into that system and help them grow that young quarterback. What I think they should do, right? It's like team building. Let's draft one of those guys, offensive tackle, receiver. Let's go into free agency and get the other, and build this thing around Drake May with a year of sitting where he can then go and be like, okay, I'm starting to understand this, right? I'm actually much higher on Drake May today than I was 4 or 5 weeks ago, right? Before the season began. I'm higher on him today than I was 4 weeks ago. And that is a testament to the Patriots and their ability to team build. And I think that just goes to show the great leadership, not just at the coaching level, GM level, but also the ownership level, right? Knowing how to win. So shout out to Robert Kraft on that. I think they're doing a great job with Drake May.
Love it. Love it. Okay. 13 and a half minutes on quarterbacks. They always get the glory. That's already way too much time being spent talking about them. However, we're going to continue talking about them, but in a bit of a different light. There's been a lot of talk around the NFL. We've seen the tweets thrown out there comparing the average yards per game, passing yards per game, and total passing touchdowns through week 3, week 4, et cetera, right? Versus years past. And they're all correct. Traditional statistics are way down when it comes to just the passing game as a whole. But that does not equate to quarterback play around the league being down as a whole. So, for example, just through September, 14 starting quarterbacks have graded above 70 for the season thus far. So yes, defenses have adjusted. We've heard the rants from like Mel Kiper talking about why too high safety coverages should be banned, which is ridiculous, right? But we've heard the discourse around the shift in too high or quarters coverages even in the NFL, taking away those explosive plays. And that's an adjustment from defenses as a result of the last decade plus of passing offenses becoming more pass heavy, more explosive, more big play oriented, defenses have adjusted to that. But at the same time, or in response to that, quarterbacks have adjusted on a down to down basis. So while we have less highlights and statistics to sort of show how good these quarterbacks are playing, because touchdowns are down and yards are down and maybe even yards per attempt are down, their actual down to down play and their grading and their touchdown to turnover ratios and turnover worthy throws are all steady or slightly down. So just because the statistics and the highlights aren't eye popping does not mean that quarterback play as a whole is decreasing. It's actually not, and probably holding steady where the middle class of NFL quarterbacks is deeper than we expected, maybe going into that. And maybe a part of that is guys like Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold now going into competent situations to where they can actually be successful like they always could have been. But even guys like Geno Smith, right, in this environment where it's less boom or bust with guys like that than it was in the past, whether it's the evolution of the Shanahan coaching tree, which is now permeating nearly half the league, to where they can adjust with motions and angles and such to not rely on explosive plays when the defense isn't giving it to them, and they can manufacture yards in the middle of the field and in that intermediate area. I think that's just a good point to note, to where some, people were freaking out last month about touchdowns being down. And I think it's just, sure, touchdowns are down. That's great. But the game of football as a whole, the quality of play you're getting from the quarterback position has not decreased by any measure. If anything, it's evolved and adjusted to the defenses sort of playing catch up to the teens of the 21st century and the explosiveness that we saw at that point.
That's a great point. And I agree with everything you're saying. I also would just kind of point out, right? Maybe, well, I'm going to even go back. One of the things I love about football is that it's dislike baseball in that when something happens in the game that kind of gives one side of the ball a strategic advantage, like the shift did in baseball, baseball went and said, we're going to make this illegal, right? And like that's, in my mind, the wrong thing to do, because what they could have done is say, hey, instead of hitting 50 home runs or 60 home runs like they're trying to make every player do, let's get guys that can hit for average and just change the mental approach to batting, right? That's not baseball. They couldn't do that because the home run is so important to getting fans in the stands and people watching the TV. Football, shout out to you guys. You're going to watch it no matter what, right? You want to see good football, and that means that you will be okay with not maybe having so much home run ball on the screen. You're okay with watching good, strategic, go through your downs, hit the underneath route when needed kind of football. And when I look at the list of top quarterbacks in the NFL right now, Derek Carr, Brock Purdy, Baker Mayfield, Aaron Rodgers, Joe Burrow, those are guys that are really good at doing that, right? And I was trying to look up a couple things while you were talking, right? Because I think that average depth of target, there's only one player in the top 20. There are two players in the top 20. One of them is number 20 for passing grade that have an over 10 average depth of target, right? Which means that they're throwing it less than 10 yards per attempt. I don't know if this is the first time that that's happened in a while, but it seems pretty low to me. Brock Purdy is the only one in the top 10 to have it. He has it at 11 yards, so it's not even that crazy. And then the other thing is time to throw, right? Derek Carr is the number one graded quarterback in passing this year in PFF grading with a time to throw of 2.57 seconds. If I look at last year's leader, it was Tua, and his was like 2.3 seconds, right? Those are guys that are getting the ball out of their hand extremely fast. That's important in today's NFL when there's two high safeties, right? Like when you're taking away the deep threat, take advantage of the underneath stuff. Get the ball out of your hand fast, right? I think that's why these quarterbacks are being a little bit more successful. But even guys like Lamar Jackson this year, 2.92 seconds, and he is the sixth highest graded passing quarterback in PFF grading. That says something to me. Jaden Daniels, 3.01. That's still very good for a running style quarterback. Typically, you see them like 3.2. I think another example, right? We talk about Justin Fields and how far he's come. His is for the first time in his career under 3 seconds to throw the ball. The play is actually getting better, I think, right? Because these, again, like young guys like Justin Fields, Jaden Daniels, Brock Purdy, like they know that they need to get the ball out of their hand quickly. They're trusting the system. And I feel like it's kind of working for them. But that actually leads to a point that I had to raise. So I'm gonna go next here. One thing that I'm noticing is a big difference between coaches that should be coordinators and coaches that should be head coaches. I think that, a head coach really should be able to run the entire program. And then there are coaches that are really good at offensive coordinator, really good at defensive coordinator, and because of that, raised to a head coach position, but maybe they're just not head coaches, right? And I actually saw a tweet. I think it might have been Mike Renner from RIP PFF, but I think he's now with CNN or something like that.
CNN. I don't know if he's with CNN, but sure.
No,
Let's go with that.
I don't know
CNN
who he is.
correspondent Mike Renner. Yes, please
Don't
continue.
they have a sports program? I don't know. Anyway, I think he just said, he was like, I don't even know where I was going with this. Something about, how Mike McDaniels, right? And I'm totally wrong. It was totally Austin Gale that said this. But you could snip
Yes,
this if you
Austin
want.
Gale from Fox News. Continue.
He's from The Ringer. Austin Gale with The Ringer said, Mike McDaniels, with Tua being out, like this offense basically just fell into ruins, right? It's nothing is happening. What was the excuse for LaFleur in Green Bay? What was the excuse for? I think there's been like 3 other quarterbacks that have missed time this year, and they've had to go to these backup quarterbacks. But look at what LaFleur did with Malik Willis during that time, being able to win games, right? Like, to me, that's a really good head coach. Something is happening in Miami, right? Like they didn't build this team the right way, and that shows me immaturity in team building. And to me, that's sort of on the head coach, right? Like, we said it during the draft. I was like, if they don't get an offensive lineman, I'm going to be so upset because it's just going to ruin Tua. I know the injury didn't happen because of poor line play. It happened because he was running the ball and kind of did so inefficiently. But if you put good offensive line play out there, I would assume that the backup quarterbacks would be doing a better job, right? Not everyone can get the ball out of their hands in 2.3 seconds like Tua can. But instead they went and got an edge rusher, right? So team building is failing there. I'm seeing it more than just with Miami. That's just an example I'm using. But look at the Steelers, right? He's making Justin Fields look like a competent NFL quarterback, something that the Bears couldn't. Now let's look at the Bears, right? And Eberflus there, right? Like, he's just proving again that he's just not a good NFL coach. Great coordinator. He'd be a fantastic coordinator. Should not be a head coach of an NFL team. I think until these teams realize that you really have to find the guy that's more than just the coordinator, more than just the savant mind, like Mike McDaniels is, you're not going to be a good NFL team, right? And I think Seattle might have hit on one there. Again, because that team doesn't really have all the weapons. It doesn't have the flashiest offense, doesn't have the big names on defense really either. But each unit is playing really well and really strong, and the weaknesses kind of get disguised a little bit, right? That shows me what a good NFL coach is.
So Mike McDaniel is the Lincoln Riley of the NFL.
Maybe. I don't want to compare him
You were
to
going to say
Cliff Kingsbury because he's better than that. But
he is better than that.
But I do think that there's a comparison to be made there. There's a great coordinator, maybe not a great head coach.
Could be, yeah. And even when Miami was healthy, if you look back to their playoff loss, that was just a poor effort because it was cold. Basically, because it was cold and sleek and frozen, and it's just, you got to be better than that, because at some point the yards, which kind of goes back to the original point about quarterback play evolving, right? The yards and touchdowns are what you see, but it's not necessarily what always wins games or what always signals quality play from a given position. And Miami put up a ton of yards, high flying. They're the fastest guys. They have a 30-year-old Raheem Mostert who's still one of the fastest running backs, and he's streaking it. But at some point, the details matter when you go a level beyond that, and consistently they weren't able to get it done. Injuries also didn't help, and now they're just in a really bad spot overall, to be honest, from a roster construction standpoint. Even if Tua comes back, they're still a couple years away at least, assuming that he then is just clean bill of health from there on out, which I don't see how you could realistically count on that. So you need a better backup plan than Huntley and Skylar Thompson at quarterback. It's just not going to work.
All right, what do you got next?
What do I have next? Anything that's not just me patting myself on the back for being right. This one actually kind of is, but it's not necessarily like a celebratory thing. But one of my favorite sayings always is, you get what you pay for. And I kind of suffered this because, bad general managers in real life, such as, Jerry Jones, think that they're getting away with things by signing injured players at discounts. They did it with Jalen Smith. They've done it. First drafting Jalen Smith, then extending him, right? But they've done this with other injured players in the past, where now you get them at a discount because they blew out their knee or something, or their Achilles, and the repaired parts are never as good as the original. They're just not. It's just not. Which is not the way we're built as humans. And so when you take an injured player at a discount, when you get Jalen Phillips in round 8, round 9 of your startup, when prior to his Achilles injury, he was more so like a round 3, round 4 type of guy, when the first edge rushers started to go in these drafts, you're banking on a best case scenario, and the body just breaks down after a while. It's not that the hamstring doesn't heal, or the broken bone doesn't heal. It's that the accumulation of these hits and these injuries over time causes something else to go. So yes, the Achilles was cleared, but when you add up the fact that he was like hit by a car, broke his back or something in college, had to retire medically in college, came back, then suffered another debilitating injury to his Achilles in the NFL, and now has another season-ending lower body injury to his knee in the NFL, you're not really getting a steal. You get what you pay for. They're at a discount for a reason. So when you try to get a steal in a trade, or some sort of arbitrage opportunity in your startup draft, it really is buyer beware. Don't get enamored with the best case scenario, because it rarely works out that way. Even if someone has a clean bill of health going into the league, the best case scenario hardly ever comes about, right? Same thing goes with Jonathan Brooks, for example. This season, he hasn't hit the field yet. We're already a month into the season. He's not going to be 100% when he does. It's a bad team, a bad situation. They've already lost some of their best players too. But then they lose Derek Brown for the year too. That whole roster is just a mess. So what are you even putting him into? What kind of environment is that? So if you're someone who invested highly in him because he's young and he was super talented, and he passed up on other running backs, thinking that you're being patient and going to get a steal when he comes back, I don't think that's the case. I think we have to really, I'm always the guy, and maybe I do go a step too far at times, but I really take into account injury history when I'm profiling a player just when they come into the league. I don't like it if you had a Liz Frank sprain. I don't like it if you have one ACL tear. I mean, KJ Hamler had one ACL tear coming into the league, happened again, and now he's completely out of the league. When, if you recall, his first year and a half or so in the NFL, he had explosive highlights and was looking like a real gem for Denver. But again, the reason for the discount is always lurking around the corner and just waiting to rear its ugly head again. So I think, and I kind of harp on this at different points in time during the pre-draft process, but I really think we as all 22 users, or whatever platform you play on as a fantasy owner, what have you, and just NFL teams in general, really have to take a closer look at injury history and just the general wear and tear of a body. And I know they do during the combine, but I'm sorry, I always reject the notion of a clean ACL tear. Oh, it was a clean tear. It was just the ACL. So in 10 months, he'll be fine. No, he won't. It will take still 16 months for him to get confidence back. And then he is now one other injury away from having 2 major lower body injuries, which at that point just cripple you as a player. And with the state of athletes in the NFL today, you don't keep up once that happens. So again, just pay close attention to that, and just don't go bargain hunting with premium picks, because it can and will come back to bite you.
I'm going to play off of this a little bit because I agree with everything you said, but I do think that the new 17-game schedule is exacerbating this. I think that there are a lot of players that are older, and where before maybe they could slide into their early 30s and play a little bit longer than they would. It's happening less and less, and those guys are still getting injured. I mean, Cam Hayward just came back from injury, but like he's been missing time. You see Cooper Kupp like comes back and is missing time again. I don't know if we're going to see more of that, right? But besides even just older players, I think we're just seeing more players not being able to survive a 17-game season, right? I think Joe Burrow was spot on again. I'm going to talk about it again, where I think they do need to incorporate 2 bye weeks into the NFL season so that these guys can properly rest themselves. Because I'll tell you, like being, an ex semi college football player, it's like
Don't
when
sell
you play
yourself short.
when you play 10 games in a row, your body is shot, right? Like that is an extremely long stretch of time. These guys, some of them are playing, right? Like this is week 5. People are already having their bye weeks, which means they're going to play 12 games in a row, 12 weeks in a row. That's brutal for an NFL player. Think about the getting hit by a car for 12 weeks in a row. Like that's crazy talk, right? So I think depth is so important now in all 22 because you're going to see guys get injured, right? So if you do have an opportunity to, make a trade to add depth and maybe get rid of an older player that might have some injury concerns, like Ray's saying, if you're a buyer, don't do this. But like, if you're the seller, try to sell, try to add some depth to your team because you're definitely going to need it throughout the season. I do have a pat myself on the back one here, but I did want to say, I think it's week 4 and we're already seeing how special this rookie offensive line class was, which is something that it's been years since we've been able to say that, right? We have, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 6 offensive tackle rookies starting as first round picks. We have multiple centers starting. We have multiple guards starting in the NFL that were rookies. I can't tell you the last time we've seen that. And every single weekend when we go on Twitter, it's not even just us being the offensive lineman focused fantasy football platform. There are other, media sources that are like posting Zach Frazier highlights or, Joe Alt highlights and saying like, wow, like these dudes are absolutely special. So I think if you did invest in this rookie offensive line class, you're very excited and you should be very happy with yourself. Even guys like, Olu or Mims or Guyton who haven't graded extremely well yet, it's still promising that their teams trust them enough to put them on the field, right, this early. I think offensive line, yes, it would be great if they can sit and learn just like a quarterback. But there's this very linear, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very black and white where it's like, guys
Binary.
rushing you. Binary, that's the word. It's very binary, right? Guys rushing you. Can you make the block? Can you not make the block? It's athleticism, it's skill, it's technique, but it comes with repetition. Quarterback is so mental. Offensive line, yes, there are mental aspects of it, but you rely, if you have a veteran quarterback, it makes that easier. And it really is just that repetition and that technique and getting better. So I think it is a positive thing to see these guys playing early, even if they're not playing extremely well. But again, it's like, when was the last time you saw like 15 rookie offensive linemen playing like decently well?
Yeah, it's been a while, and there's some concerns with some of them playing early. But even think like Cooper Beebe, he basically learned a new position and is starting at it. He was a guard, and now they moved him to center. And week 1, he's out there. So yeah, we mentioned this during the pre-draft process. This was a great time to need an offensive lineman because they were aplenty, and they all went relatively early, right? At least it's tackles in particular, of course, in round 1, being that's the more premium spot, but interior as well. And, BB was drafted in the 3rd round, for example, as another one. So it was a good draft for offensive linemen. We'll kind of see what 2025 has in store for us there because it's always going to be a supply and demand issue, right? Every team could always use more quality offensive linemen. So we'll see how that shakes out this next class, but they're living up to the billing so far for 2024, which is good.
Question for you, right? Because like I actually had a fun like thought experiment that I did with myself because I'm a psychopath.
Mm-hmm.
But it was kind of like how do you identify your favorite players in the NFL? Like I understand people are going to be like, hometown favorites. They're going to talk about those guys. But like how do you identify them? And I was thinking about it and I'm like, for me, it's like guys that I scouted that worked out, right? Like, and like there's going to be guys like Jamar Chase that I'm always going to love just because I think that the way they play the game is fantastic. But Cooper Beebe is the exact example of how I choose my favorite players. It's like, okay, who's the guy I was way high on compared to the consensus that I just couldn't give up on and actually worked out? And I mean, obviously he's still young, whatever. But like, is that how you pick your favorite players? Because like I'm obsessed with this dude. And I'm so happy to see that he's playing decently well.
You saying my favorite player now is Sam Darnold. Baker Mayfield, those are my favorite players.
Probably.
First off, it's where did they go to school, right? If you went to Ohio State or Michigan, you're automatically like my least favorite player, period. So yeah, there's always a sense of pride, right? What did we call it a couple episodes ago? It's like the proud dad moment when you stick your neck out for someone or on someone, right? I didn't actually stick my neck out for any of these guys, but called when in the pre-draft process or what have you, that, hey, I really like these guys, and they are completely underdrafted and they should be getting paid more attention to than they are, whether that's a Benton or whoever. There's a certain sense of pride that goes into it, and that's what makes the process so fun. But I'll pick a favorite for any number of reasons, man. You say something funny on Instagram, you make a big hit. You just seem like a tough guy. If you just trash talk like L'Jarius Sneed is like an incredible trash talker. I don't know if you saw the video of him against the Dolphins the other night with Waddle and Tyreek Hill, but it's like, yeah, instant you move up the list, right? But the pride factor that goes into identifying someone that was drafted, like you said, like day 2, right? Late day 2 or even day 3. And you hit on that player and you pounded your fist on the table for him. The pride that comes with that is, again, it's not the highlights, but when you see that payoff, it's a great feeling. So yeah, I'm totally with you there. Travis Jones, baby.
What else you got?
Next? I got one more here that we can touch on. And a couple of the takeaways are things we already knew, but now it's how do we necessarily put them into action, right? So a couple statements. It is easier to run routes than to cover those routes. I think most people would agree there. It is easier to rush the passer than pass block. Some people may disagree there, but I think the numbers bear it out. So just for the month of September, we had 290 plus and 680 plus graded wide receivers in the top 10 of scoring wide receivers in the All-22 platform in September. So it's not just straight grades if you played 30 snaps total for the month and you're a highly graded receiver. No, we're talking players who were on the field a significant number of snaps each game and how they graded out, or players in particular, not just receivers. Meanwhile, at 290 plus and then 6 above 80.
Okay,
out
so
of
eight
top
total
10.
above 80. Okay, got it.
One corner graded 80 plus in September. One in the league. You know who it was? It was Christian Fulton. It wasn't Patrick Surtain. It wasn't Sauce. It was Christian Fulton. And again, this is of the 10 highest scoring on the platform. So if you only played one game and you graded 86, you don't reach the threshold here, right? So maybe there's someone who missed a couple games and now is grading highly, but in general, the guys that were consistently on the field, only one at corner graded higher than an 80. And it was Christian Fulton. So it's not just like, oh, well, the guy you would expect, the best corner in the game, whether you believe that to be Sauce Gardner, whether you believe that to be Surtain or even Jalen Ramsey at this point. No, it was Christian Fulton, who had not been playing at this level the first, 3 years in the league. And we'll see if he continues this through the next 3 months and, the remainder of the season. But it just goes to show you that perhaps corner is just too high variance of a position to really invest highly into as a user on the platform, or at least be comfortable doing so. Perhaps, and this is something maybe we'll monitor month by month, to see, do the top names again. And typically they do, to an extent, sort of rise to the top, and you're more familiar with the names that end up being the highest graded players at the position at the end of the year. But on a week-to-week basis, if you just wasted a month and you kind of got burned because, because your starting corner, oh my gosh, who's my boy on the Texans here? Not Lassiter, the other guy, Stingley, because Stingley had a couple rough games out of the gate, and you dropped 2 games you shouldn't have, and now you might miss playoffs at the end of the year because of that. What good does that do you? So the variance at corner perhaps is a signal to us, whether it's in a startup draft, to go somewhere else with the non-quarterback premium picks early on because they're less risky, and then try to find guys you like afterwards, or in trades for that matter. Maybe be a little more comfortable giving up a big name corner in a trade for a receiver or a tackle or something in that respect, because now you're just getting rid of that high variance at corner, that you just don't have to deal with that headache. And now your best players can be your best players every week instead of maybe for 7 weeks out of the year, and might burn you a game or 2 here or there by the end of the season. So to that, I'm gonna just continue the rant here. Receivers are much more predictable. The names at the top of that list: Nico Collins, Chris Olave, Justin Jefferson, Malik Neighbors. As a matter of fact, although he's a rookie, we'll see if he plays this coming week. So none of those names are real surprises. Maybe you didn't have Nico as your number one receiver at this point, but that's not a shocking name to see at the top of the list. Whereas Christian Fulton obviously is at the top of the cornerback list is a shocker. So for edge and offensive tackle to go about the whole pass rush versus pass block thing, those are the familiar names you see at the top of those lists as well. You know, you'll see your Bosa's, your Garrett's, you'll see Sewell, you'll see those guys at the top of their respective positions. Really, cornerback on its own is sort of the blinking light there to where we talked about it being a high variance position, but it really is a roller coaster. You don't know what you're going to get.
It's the hardest position to play in football from a physicality standpoint, and it's not even debatable. Like I don't even want to hear it. But I do actually in the comments if you want to comment and prove me wrong. But yeah, and just for people that are saying, you know, Zion McCollin or DJ Reed have PFF grades that are higher than 80, they do. But what Ray is saying is they didn't qualify in certain weeks for all 22 points because they had under the snap minimum, so they would be kind of like taken out of this equation. But that's a cool thing about all 22, right? Is like we want to know, like, did you actually have a big impact in this game? That's why we have the snap count minimum. And our points total is, in my opinion, like the truest identifier for long-term success over the course of a season. You'll see how it's different, right? If a guy misses a couple games, you'll see how that impacts him versus, you know, a guy that played maybe a little bit worse, but played the entire season, things like that. But yeah, I agree with everything you said. And cornerback is again, really unpredictable. It's one of the hardest things to figure out. And like guys like Denzel Ward, even, right? Like they can go from the highest graded player in the system in 1 year, and the next year they might be kind of bad, right? And we talked about how it could even be that you just have a tight hip or like a, you know, like a hamstring, right? And it's like that minor ache or pain might be enough to throw you off, right? It's like a pebble in your shoe that's going to just over the course of a season be big enough or impactful enough to, you know, to curve your skill that you're not going to be able to do the things you did in the previous year. So something to definitely look after. Interesting, like you said as well, it's like it's much easier to be an edge rusher than a tackle, right? Edge rusher's job is to go for the quarterback. You know, it's very rare that they're going to have like super negatively graded plays because if they lose, it doesn't necessarily mean that they made some massive mistake, right? And the quarterback might have gotten the ball out of his hand in 2 seconds, and you didn't even have a chance to really make an impact, right? But a tackle, it's like, okay, if they got beat, it's going to be very clear and evident, and it's going to be visible, and it's going to hit them much, much harder. So pretty cool observations there. How do you want to wrap this thing up, Ray?
Well, let me just throw out the numbers quickly because I think I touched on it with coverage and route running versus pass rush and pass block. But so the average grade for the top 10 scoring tackles on the platform was 83, just over 83, right? For edge rushers, it was over 88.3. So that's a pretty significant difference again, and we're talking of the top players at that spot. So when you talk about investing picks or trading for players that have the most impact for you week to week, we talk about those non-quarterbacks having those games where they take over and break out and can swing the score for that week in your favor. It seems to favor edge rushers versus tackles and receivers versus corners. To DJ Reed's point, I think he missed the second week of the season, I believe, with injury. So, yeah, over the course of the season, yeah, he'll probably surpass someone like a Christian Fulton, of course, because I think DJ Reed is a heck of a player, just as an example. So, but again, just goes to show you, it's not about finding the exception that missed one game. It's looking at the trend as a whole and trying to make the decisions that most minimize your risk and give you the best chance over time to win. And at no position is that harder to do than cornerback. So I agree with your sentiment there. Of course, if you're a listener and you're screaming at us, you're talking to two cornerbacks. So of course we're going to say it's the hardest, but it is, despite how easy we make it look for those of you who might have seen us at the Fantasy Football Expo the last couple of years. But with that, yeah, that's all I had. Those are my takes. Look at that. Look at that bling. You had that ready to go.
Yeah, they're ready to go, man.
Oh man. Now this is, yeah, we bragged way too much this episode. We got real full of ourselves, but
do you know why, man? Just
today's been humbling.
Yeah. It's like, you get humbled so often. So you need to raise yourself up when you can. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Second episode of the week. We're excited to be trying to do this a little bit more often. If you haven't yet, please give us a review wherever you watch or listen to your podcast. Also, give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at all22_PFF. And have a great weekend. Enjoy the games.
Go.